Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world today. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of End of Growth to Prism. Big announcement today where this is the last episode before we go on our summer break. We'll be back sometime in mid-September, bigger and better than ever. But we're going to take a few weeks off over the course of the summer to deal with vacations and things like that. So we spent the first several weeks of this broadcast talking about contemporary leadership and some of the key attributes of leaders, modern day leaders. And we talked about the shifting of priority stacks in terms of what our clients are looking for in their leaders. Things like empathy have moved up to the top of the list, or in the past you may have seen other things like executive presence and operational excellence, things like that. Driving culture has moved up to the top of the list. We no longer talk about employee morale. We talk about the cultural environment. We talk about employee engagement. So that has shifted quite a bit. And then we talked about leading into, during, and out of a crisis and what type of attributes are required in that type of space. The ability to own the room via video, which is kind of new. We talked about resiliency and the ability to handle stress and to adapt. We talked about being able to enable human innovation. How do we make innovation a human element, more human? So we've had a lot of different things we talked about. If you missed any of those episodes, please feel free to go back and download them. They're available on all of your popular social media channels. So today, we kind of want to wrap it up a little bit in terms of, we know this crisis is going to end hopefully sooner than later. A lot of great news about vaccines coming out the last few days. Parts of Europe are doing very well managing the virus, not so much in the US, but we'll get there. So we also know that vaccine or no vaccine, there's a new normal coming. And that contemporary leader we discussed at the beginning of the show, the beginning of the broadcast, and those attributes that that contemporary leader possess are probably going to shift again as we enter this new normal. So today we want to talk a little bit about what we think our clients are going to be asking us for, and what we're already seeing our clients ask us for in terms of the priority stack surrounding this new normal. So Vera, Jim, who wants to start in terms of what you think that priority stack's going to look like in terms of leadership attributes? We've got culture, we've got empathy, we've got operational excellence, we've got video presence, we've got executive presence, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a lot of different things that go into this, but I do see a different priority stack for the new normal leader versus what we've been recruiting so far.
Yeah, totally agree. I think I had this amazing conversation yesterday with the dean of Penn State, New Kensington. His name's Dr. Kevin Snyder, and he's completely transforming the way that he's building curriculum out for the Penn State University system. And he brought up these really great points. Exactly the question that you're asking, Mike, was, what are these new attributes that we should be looking for in these new sets of competencies? And for his point of view, it was all completely related to the fourth industrial revolution, right? The fourth industrial revolution is, as we were talking about it, it was coming, it was there, all these things, but the pandemic has just force-fed it to happen now. And so what do we look for? And he had four main points that he's saying that we should actually start at kindergarten level, looking at the curriculum of how people should start, thinking and wrapping their minds in the type of human when it comes to leadership attributes we should be looking for. And the very first one was transparency. He's saying it's an attribute that everybody has to be embraced, that you can't be the leader or the organization that keeps things siloed or to yourself or even keeping secrets. Because in today's interconnected world, that everything is happening and you've got to be that kind of level of transparency because it's going to get out anyways. And it's best to have the second attribute that he's talking about, collaboration. So the ability to be very transparent and collaborative are interconnected to kind of what we need to be doing right now. And his third and fourth point, before I stop talking and let Vera come in, is the third point was an extreme willingness to fail. You've got to have the mindset that you need to be someone that is willing to fail forward. And we've used that term many times, Mike. That's one of your terms too about failing forward. And the last one is emotional intelligence. Those four things are so interconnected to what he believes is the fourth industrial revolution attributes, but also it's just highlighted by the pandemic. And that we need to start looking and building those type of things from as early as we can moving forward.
Jim, did he have any insights? So, the word collaboration is big, right? It can deal with diversity and inclusion and things like that. But even talking about leaders who are good at diversity and inclusion, I don't think is good enough moving forward. The whole term social justice now is kind of overridden corporations having diversity and inclusion programs. It's much, much bigger than that. It's much more powerful and compelling, and organizations need to do much, much more than they've been doing over the last decade or more. Do you have any insight into how that's going to layer in there and how leaderships are going to play into that space?
Yeah, he kind of talked about just really opening the blinders. So when you talk about diversity and inclusion, it's really that inclusive side of collaboration, and it's from a global perspective. This goes back to transparency, that we've just got to realize that we are all interconnected, that everything is seamless, to the point where the car driving down the road is producing so much data within it, but we're only taking a small bit out of it, right? And everything. And so we just have to think of the world that way. So when we talk about social justice and inclusion and diversity and all that stuff, it is the realization that it's all around us. You have to be the type of person that accepts it, and that it's a part of the DNA of who you are and the organization and all those kind of things. And it's too, at least we're talking about it, but it's almost too late, because we should just be doing it. We should be doing these type of things. And that was his point when it came to this level of collaboration.
It kind of goes back to the book, The World is Flat, that came out many, many years ago. And it was very much ahead of its time. And you used the word accept, which I do think is the beginning. It is the starting point, acceptance, and we obviously got to get way beyond acceptance, and we've got to get to the point where we're literally inviting it, right? So
Yeah.
when you look at change, there's change adverse people, there's change accepting people, then there's change inviting people. It's the same thing with cultures. Well, with social justice, it's the same thing. There's going to be a segment of a population that, whether people like it or not, there's going to be a segment of the population that is adverse to these social justice initiatives. And we've got to get to the point where accepting rules the day. And from accepting, we've got to take it to inviting. And when we get to the inviting stage, then we know we're home. We know we're there, and we're doing all the right things. So some great points.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah. Vera, what do you have to add?
I would add one point with respect to what we call business transformation, right? Because of course, right now, especially in a short-term perspective, it's kind of hard to judge what would be positive implications of the COVID crisis, right? It has been completely unexpected, unprecedented, but still, I think that the entire discussion about the leadership crisis, about business transformation, about really openness and flexibility that organizations need to adapt to, let's say, not to a new normal, but to a constantly changing environment, and to also successfully manage, for example, complex digitalization processes. This conversation has started long before the outbreak of the COVID-19, and I think that in some cases this situation has served as a catalyst to all those transformation processes, which were very difficult to manage, especially in organizations that are very traditional, very conservative, and where there was this clash between different leadership layers, because senior people and senior leaders and managers, they were just struggling with themselves or with the organization, with the culture, with respect to how to embrace this innovation in a way that it accommodates everyone, but at the same time creates opportunities for an organization. So I think that many companies, they were forced to rethink the strategy and to take measures actually to manage this process with more flexibility, more agility, and really reconsider the entire value chain within the company. And I think in this respect, the leadership, the talent layer, it's fundamental because essentially seeing that there are many processes at the operational level we cannot control. You put people at the heart of an organization, and as we have discussed before, it's a lot. It comes down a lot to the engagement and to the motivation of your 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 people lever in the organization. So I think that even though it's again like it's maybe it's not right to reflect on it as a positive consequence of the crisis, but it definitely has these positive implications, and you see it with the client because at all levels, our discussions right now, they develop not only around the topic of executive search, but actually of how to effectively manage complex transformation processes and extracting the maximum value from the human capital there, but at the same time giving this security and long-term perspective to people, which makes our work and our mission much more strategic than it was
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, very good point.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. So Vera, one of the big transformations I'm seeing here is the transformation of the workspace. So for example, my son has a dozen people working for him, but last week he drove to work and cleaned out his office because he doesn't have it anymore. His company decided that they're going to eliminate an incredible amount of office space. And if he does at some point go back to an office, it's going to be in a highly reconfigured office with maybe shared offices where, 1 week in, 1 week out, that type of thing. But he's basically, his home is now his office, and that's the decision his company made with tens of thousands of employees. What's happening in Europe with things like that? Did you see a similar transformation where companies have already decided that a high percentage of the workforce are just working from home from now on? And there is an advantage to the corporation, obviously. If you can effectively lead and manage from home, then office space is one of the big consumptions of overhead for corporations. So if they're not paying for an office, it saves companies a lot of money. So it is to an advantage if it works well. Do you see that trend happening in Europe yet, or is it still people
We
just
see
waiting to
this
go
trend,
back?
Mike, but mostly I would say with global international companies or American companies like Google and Microsoft that they implemented in their European operations, or European companies which are also international. Of course, for small and medium-sized businesses, I think that psychologically it's a big trouble. And we see it, for example, in Southern European economies because many sectors are dominated by these family or small, medium-sized businesses. And again, it comes down to the company culture because those companies which have a more traditional culture, I would say, in some cases, kind of an autocratic approach of managing and leading people. Of course, for them, it's very difficult, and they don't really think that the way of having your people working from home would be more effective. But of course, global-minded and open-minded companies they do it, and I think that here in Europe we have many companies which have allowed their employees to work from home. I think until the end of December. And then we see what happens. But then again, I think that we will have the clarity and we'll be able, to put some numbers and put some statistics starting from September, because right now it's still a very chaotic process, and many are speaking about the second wave of COVID-19. Then, companies they're still trying to balance also from the point of view of their social and economic obligations, because they still can receive some help from the government. But from September on, when the situation, I'm not saying it will be stabilized, but it will be clear in a way that there's no more aid and you have to rely on yourself and already come back to work after holidays with reimagined structures and reimagined processes. I think that those companies which have been reluctant to accept this, they will unfortunately bear the hardest economic consequences, because flexibility and adaptability, I think these are among the two words that everyone has to have in their head, when it comes to decision making.
Assuming we get a vaccine, there's obviously industries that will get back to normal, banks and things like that, financial institutions that need people on site 100% of the time, or will get back to their normal. But I think a lot of other businesses are going to transition to whatever this new normal may look like. And I think transformation is actually a great competency when you think about it, because it has to be the umbrella over the top of all the other competencies. If you're going to transform culture, you're going to transform employee engagement, you're going to transform social justice platforms, you're going to transform the workplace and who's working from home, who's working in physical locations. So as you start to stack up all these different attributes and competencies that this next new normal leader needs, transformation does have to get up to the top. And we don't want to forget about empathy. We've talked about that several times. And I had a boss in my career, and he was a good boss, but there was one aspect of his personality that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. He refused to get into any type of personal conversation with the people that worked for him. He didn't want to know how many kids you had. He didn't want to know if you were married, divorced, whatever. He wanted to know nothing about you outside of the work you did, because he felt like it created bias if you had to make tough decisions on layoffs or even promotions. And he didn't want to have empathy for somebody because he felt like it would drive him to make a bad decision. He wanted to make an unemotional decision. A lot of people had an incredibly hard time with that, and they ended up quitting. They didn't want to work for him because of that. So I think empathy, today, I don't think he could function. I think he'd be dysfunctional with that type of operating model. So empathy is at the top of the list. So we have ability to do big transformations. We have empathy. We have needing to have video presence. There's just so many things on the list that we wouldn't have even talked about as little as 5 years ago. And it's really kind of incredible.
Yeah, another one that I would add that I think is an emerging thing, talking to leaders thinking about the future, is a sense of entrepreneurship. So there's a difference between a business person and an entrepreneur, in the fact of a straight up business person calculates in risk a lot more, calculates in truly how far they can take things, and are willing to go up to the edge but not necessarily go over it. Where the entrepreneurial is willing to fail, continue to fail, to figure it out, to keep having that sense of movement, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, and just keep going. And it was very interesting on some of the picture that's starting to be drawn out about the differences of that, because I'll be honest with you, thinking a lot about just as a business perspective, sometimes I lump entrepreneurial into that, and it's not. It's a completely different road and a mindset.
That's a great observation, because I am a business person. I think if anybody, measured how I operate, I've, worked at multi-billion-dollar companies, ran billion-dollar P&Ls. There's a lot of consequences when you're a publicly traded company if you screw up. So even though failing's okay, if you fail, most of the time you have to fail fast enough so nobody notices, type of thing. So you deal with that type of thing. And, I can even draw a better parallel. So I used to race cars on road courses. And one of the big challenges I had getting faster is there's this thing called a limit in a race car, where you bring the car right up to the limit of grip, just to the very edge of the tires letting go and no longer being able to grip the pavement. And I excelled at bringing that car to the limit. Every racing coach I had would say, Mike, you're really, really good. You bring that car right to the limit. You're really smooth getting it there. But guess what? Unless you start bringing the car past the limit, unless you're willing to let that car start sliding around and go, woohoo, you're not going to get any faster. I was never able to break down that barrier. Every once in a while, I could get away with it if I got mad at myself or I got in the mood. But 80% and 85% of the time, I still went up to that limit and stopped. So I think that same thing that you just talked about, it's the same thing with an entrepreneur, where a business person takes the business to the limit. Every once in a while, they'll slide the tires. But the entrepreneur, they'll let that car slide all over the place, and they'll be whooping and hollering, and they don't. If they spin around, they don't care. They just put the car back on the road and keep going again. So totally get that. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I'm stealing that, by the way, Mike, just so that you know.
There you
I do
go.
think
Yeah.
that entrepreneurial spirit is something that can be learned because, of course, when we do assessment for candidates, it's definitely. I think that the number one priority of maybe 80% of positions that we have open at the moment. But then on the other hand, again, I think that I mentioned it in one of the previous discussions that again, like if you generalize, and I don't like generalizing, but if you compare, I would say an average person that was raised and developed his career in Germany and in France with someone who's in the US, of course, they are much more risk averse, not because maybe they don't have this entrepreneurial spirit, but because systems they've been designed
Yeah.
to actually, just protect employees but not entrepreneurs. It is changing right now, but
Yeah.
then people they have to change at the same time. But system they still work in a way that for many they're very talented. They're really um, performing very well, but only when they stay within this comfort zone, and they don't
Yeah.
know if they have this capacity, to get out of there and do something else, and the market needs it. So do you think it's something that can be learned and developed, or it's either you have it or you don't?
One of the things that I had this conversation with the dean of Penn State yesterday about was kind of exactly that, Vera. It was really interesting. So we didn't want to get into a generational discussion because we don't want to lump the generations like we've been doing a lot of time, but it is a part of that, right? Like, leaders that have been stuck in those systems are harder to break free of it. Younger people that have not had these type of systems, this is just a part of who they are. Like, they're going to have 9 to 12, not different jobs, but careers potentially. And that's how we've got to say, you could be a data analyst for 5 years, and all of a sudden the next 5 years, you're an EMT, or whatever. Like, they're going to switch careers, they're going to bounce around. It's embedded in the social and cultural dynamics of how they are. And so people that have been very stringent, and even in a country culture, let's just say Germany or something like that, where it is very more stringent, the newer cultural generational types, I think, are changing. So that's interesting, and it was interesting hearing his thoughts on even teaching it in business school is way too late, right? Like, we've got to address this at kindergarten, at first grade, all of those things. Like, do we stop teaching? This is just an analogy, but like, do we stop teaching children to put the round block in the round hole? Do we stop teaching them to do these things now and just say, what do you want to build out of it, or conceptualize however you wish, to start really getting the blinders out and having that more entrepreneurial feel, because everything's interconnected, everything's just always moving and not linear like it is. So it is interesting. I think there's no doubt when we talk about when we're looking for talent in the future. Another Mike saying that's very famous now is future filling. I think we honestly have to have this conversation about the current level of leadership. You can't just say is the right answer for the future. Like, we've got to start looking for some of these people that may not have gone up the traditional ladders or the corporate pyramids, and have some outside thinkers now because of the workforce and the type of work environments that's moving forward.
I agree, and I don't think we can wait for our clients to come to us because I'm not sure they even know at this point. They could give you
Correct.
they could give you some fuzziness to it,
Yeah.
but I think clients would have a hard time telling you what their number one competency or attribute is these days. I would have a hard time. I think you got to do a
Yeah.
top five and not put them in any specific order on what you're
Yep.
looking for and your next generation leader. And I think you're going to get hybrids. I think bigger companies, they're going to want the entrepreneurial spirit that bias towards speed and getting things done and being willing to fail and fail fast. But they're also going to want that business acumen wrapped around it. The company can't really deal with somebody who doesn't have the experience they need to operate within a big construct. We're still going to have Fortune 500, Global 2000. We're going to have these big multinational companies that have compliance, et cetera. It just can't run as loose and fast as a pure startup. So there is
Yep.
still going to be that line in the sand, and then there's going to be this hybrid gray area that's going to develop between that line and kind of separate it, where you're going to be able to get the best of both worlds. And you see that today. You see startups hiring seasoned business people when the leadership team of a startup gets to a certain point where
Yep.
they need more structure and business maturity added in. But that's all structural, operational, P&L type stuff. The stuff that's floating to the top now is what we used to consider soft skills, things like empathy, things like even culture was considered a soft skill for many, many years, and
Yeah.
levels of employee engagement, and video presence is something nobody ever talked about even a year ago. And now if you don't have video presence as a corporate leader, you're going to be in big trouble. So I think that top 5 is going to shift quite a bit, and it doesn't make the business acumen and the operational excellence and some of the traditional things, executive president, less important, but it does de-emphasize where they go on the list as you start to evaluate. And maybe in the past, where you could evaluate leadership attributes and competencies 5 or 6 deep to hire a great leader, now maybe you're going to go 10 deep to catch it all. You've had to expand the list, which means you're going to have
Yep.
to open our aperture in terms of how we do the assessments of leaders and
Yep.
what we recommend to our clients. But the whole future filling aspect, it's just going to quickly evolve. And I think right now there's some things that are being envisioned, but it's still kind of squishy until we do get on the other side of this, until there is a vaccine, until we can declare the war won against COVID. Then I think you're going to start seeing some more clarity of taking shape of exactly what this new normal is going to look like.
Yeah, because in a way we need deadlines. As right now, it's really hard to make any kind of planning, like business planning. I think that it just losing its sense because
Huh.
we don't know when the solution will be found. If it was clear, of course, would be easier for everyone to just adjust their 2-3 years plan to the situation. That's the interesting thing, the uncertainty.
It's interesting. One of the things that we do, even at Into Growth, is we do transition coaching once we place somebody. And one of the recent executives that is going through a coaching session with me, it was to that point, Vera. Like he was like, I'm taking a new role, and I normally have my 30, 60, 90-day plan. When I come in as a new leader, I've got the 30, 60, 90-day plan. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, and I have these certain meetings, and I lean up against the doorway and talk to certain people at certain times. Can't do any of that now. So his 30, 60, 90 day doesn't exist, and he's trying to figure out what is the new way that I onboard myself as a leader into the organization when the organization doesn't know where it's going or what timelines it's on and all that. So it's a really interesting dynamic about how the organization is wandering aimlessly sometimes on timeline, and down to the human leaders about how they've got to figure out how to adjust to new timelines too because of the situation.
Even the optics are different. And a couple weeks ago, I had a call with a prospective client, and he had on a T-shirt and sitting on his couch in his living room
Yeah.
with his laptop literally on his lap. You can see the laptop moving around as he was moving around. Had another call where somebody's sitting on their back deck, on the table on their back deck. You can see their backyard, and it catches you off guard the first time, but then you get used to it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I said, the new normal. It's the way we're going to be doing things, and I'm a huge believer in you never stop learning, and I still take a lot of classes and courses and stuff. And right now, I got 5 virtual courses. When last year I flew out to Santa Fe, New Mexico to take a workshop for 4 days. This year I'm doing it online. We're doing it through Zoom. So still get it done, but it's very different, and you do miss the face-to-face human element of it. But you adjust, do what we have to do. All right, that was a great conversation. So let's wrap up our first season, Jim, with Leadership Roulette here.
Uh-oh. All right, let's do it. All right. We'll do it. Who's the first person going today?
Vera's going to go first. Ladies first.
All right.
Stop.
All right. Oh, I can barely read it today here. I'm going to have to adjust my lights a little bit. There we go. Let your positive attitude, not circumstances or past failures, determine how you view yourself. So,
Let your positive attitude, sorry,
yeah. Let your positive attitude, not circumstances or past failures, determine how you view yourself.
okay.
That's
Well, it's a
interesting.
very interesting statement because it has both positive and negative extreme, and saying that neither the positive or the negative extreme would should guide you in your decision making that decisions have to be made with a cold head, and not taking into account neither emotional nor too rational component, which again I think that of course it depends, but I would agree that especially when we speak about critical context and leadership decisions that are really um, fundamental for an organization. For example, the situation that we are living today, right? The post-crisis action plans. So definitely, those decisions they have to be made with a cold hat, and being too positive, too optimistic. Of course, it helps. It helps through life, but having to having your foot on the ground. At least it's my personal conviction because I'm quite
Yeah.
realistic in this respect, and was thinking at some point that I was like an emotional component, but eventually it helps you when it comes to business decisions. So yes, I think it's kind of a balance that one has to find, when it comes to decision making, and again depends on the context, because I had a very interesting discussion, for example, with a candidate of mine very recently, because we're actually discussing results of a leadership assessment, and the candidate was not extremely in agreement because she was a great negotiator, but she said that I don't score really high in the negotiation. And then we started digging deeper, understanding what was the reasoning to give her this score, and eventually we found out that the negotiation, the way it was explained in this specific assessment, it was the negotiation related to this cold head harsh negotiation, which you can find in investment banking and in private equity. And in this case we were working with a project that was in fashion, which is a highly emotional industry, and of course negotiation is completely different. So I think again it's there's so many different angles when it comes to business decision making, and until what extent one can or cannot use his emotional, his human side, that it really comes down, I think, also to an emotional intelligence of a person to realize what mask to put in this specific context.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked at that as kind of don't let the past and present influence the future if they're
Yep.
negative. And if in the simplest terms, you worked for a startup, the startup went under, so you lost your job. So that's a negative past, even though it wasn't your fault. And then now you're out of a job, so that's a negative present. But if you are negative about both those things, you're gonna have a very hard time finding a new job. So you keep a positive attitude and keep your confidence up, and that'll take you into the future. So
Yeah.
don't let a negative past or present state influence the future state. You can get through it with a positive attitude.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point they were trying to say. Don't let failure define you. Learn from it and move on. And that goes along with what we started with, right? About not being afraid to fail. You should want to have that as a core competency in today's world. Just don't be defined by it.
Yep.
And keep moving forward. Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
Awesome.
All right, my turn.
All right, here we go.
Stop.
Feed the right emotions. What emotions are you feeding? Choose to feed your path and your faith and your courage. Choose to feed emotions and the right ones.
So that really goes back to what Vera was just talking about with
Yeah.
emotional balance and emotional intelligence. And I'm gonna put a twist on that. And we talked a lot about self-awareness, and I think if you have a lot of self-awareness, you can manage which emotions you choose to feed at a given time, and sometimes you even can manage certain emotions for effect with your team if you're trying to get a certain result.
Great point.
I think the more important part of this is you need to choose which emotions people feed you. Some people get very good at pushing your buttons and getting you to react a certain way, and I think it's incredibly important that you not only have self-awareness to feed your own emotions, but you got to have enough emotional intelligence to throttle the type of emotions that people are trying to feed you and get you to trigger.
Wow, that's a great point. Because and that's right. If you don't have that awareness, you can get triggered just like that. Yeah, and then just go off the rails.
Yep. Some people are very good at poking the bear.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right, here we go.
Your turn.
And I'll stop there. These are all themes that we've been talking about today, anyways. Resistance to change. What change have you been avoiding that is necessary for your team's success? Right? Wow, that just,
Transparency time, Jim.
yeah. Yeah, I would say for me in particular, I had stopped growing a little bit in for a few months. I would say from March to June. Believe it or not, I actually did very little reading. I didn't try to go out and do some growing and all of those things. I did shut down a little bit, and I was just like, I want to disconnect from work when the, at 4 o'clock every day, and I'm just going to go out and mow the lawn and not think about anything. And what I did was I was dealing with my own resilience, but I wasn't growing. And so that was something that has stopped me from being better. I will tell you, I am now taking an online course starting next week, Mike. You'd be very happy to hear that. And I've decided to continue to grow again. Like I hit that speed bump, and now I've decided to continue on with my growth mindset.
No, that's awesome. I went through the same exact thing. As you know, I've got an underlying health condition, so I've been quarantined since March and haven't even looked at a store, never in mind going inside one. And even when my family visits, it's social distance and masks and all that stuff. And that was pretty down from March till mid-June probably. My birthday was early June and didn't really get to celebrate it. Can't blow candles on a cake, no blowing on a cake. So a lot of different things kind of kicked me in the butt a little bit. And then in the middle of June, I started the same thing. It was like, I can't just do this. I would sign up for a bunch of online courses, do this, and talk to people more, text people more, get on Zoom more, and just try to get that energy back. And so totally empathize with where you were with that. Any comments on that, Vera?
Resistance to change, of course, it's part of the human nature, and I think that many have been struggling, with this unexpected situation, and especially those that tend to plan long term, and was, I think, a big crisis in terms of expectations management for me. I would say it was not that critical, because I found myself in a situation where I had some free time, to produce something apart from business development and commercial work, because of course, and to Growth France, it has only 1 year, and I think that it took a lot of time and effort, to consolidate. Not even to consolidate the presence, but just to make yourself known again in a context which is very traditional, which is very fragmented, and it was a great journey. But during this year, I was always feeling that I like this strategic time with myself to sit down, to just organize the points, to see what can be improved, to analyze, and I got some extra time for this analysis. Of course, it has been challenging from, I would say, the personal perspective, because I have a very international family, and I think that part of it's still in countries with a very critical situation, like Russia and Chile. So from this point of view, of course, it's your consciousness that tells you that, listen, you cannot enjoy it 100%, but I think it was a good time from the point of view of reflection, innovation, and so I think my side is a little bit the opposite, because I've been always willing to embrace change, to change countries, to just try some new experiences. until a point when I realized that, in certain countries where especially there's a tendency of developing very focused, specialized careers, I'm like, maybe I'm seen as someone unstable, but I don't think I am. But I think that, again, like there are two coins, two sides of a coin, and it's really important to develop this adaptability and openness to change. I think it's always hard to take the first step, but once you get into it, it's almost like a drug, because you realize that once you change, there's so many things which are opening up, and it's has its magical effect, because you really feel yourself empowered and 10 times stronger to change things and to bring something new to the company or into the
Amen.
social context.
Absolutely. So I guess to wrap up season one, and from a leadership perspective, we know the world is changing. We know companies, people, cultures are all pivoting to a new normal. That new normal is not clearly defined. As we just said, you can't let past failures or even some of the negative aspects of our current situation define you. You really have to stay positive and very much pull the future forward. So I think companies need to look at future filling their talent. I think leaders today need to look at how they're going to pivot themselves and what type of transformations they're going to make. The continuous learning we talked about, do things like that. How they're going to focus on things like empathy and culture and social justice and employee engagement as tangential elements to effective leadership against the standard operational excellence and things like that. How they're going to improve their video skills. There's just so many things going on here, but I think the key here is to be positive, to wrap your arms around a bias to action and a bias to that positive action and pulling that future forward, whether you're a company or an individual. And I think that's going to be some of the secrets to success. So this is it for our season one. We'll be back in mid-September, like I said, bigger and better. And we're going to spend the next 6 weeks architecting the show and figuring out some new topics, lining up a bunch of guest speakers. So I hope you all come back and join us when we return in September. Big thanks to Vera and Jim, and Joe's not with us today, but big thanks to him also for being with us this last several weeks. We've had some great conversations, and thoroughly enjoyed this engagement. So thank you both. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been completely fun. And anybody that's out there listening right now, please comment on what you would like to see the next season be, or if you want us to continue in this format. We'd love your comments about that.
Yep, absolutely. So stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you in September.
See you in September.
Team.